The crystal towers of Nexus Prime rose like frozen lightning against a sky of violet haze. To human eyes they seemed both breathtaking and alien, dazzling and cold at the same time, as if beauty itself had been weaponized. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the viewing window of the Liberty, the human diplomatic vessel stationed high above the world. He knew what waited for him below was not merely ceremony. It was judgment. 50 years of unrelenting expansion had brought humanity here, to a single day that would decide whether they had a place in the galaxy, or whether they would be cast out forever. For decades, human colonies had multiplied at impossible speed, spilling into regions once thought unreachable. Human traders, brash and adaptable, overturned agreements that had lasted millennia. Human explorers claimed new worlds faster than the old empires could even dispatch survey ships. To humanity, this was simply survival, growth, and curiosity. To the rest of the galaxy, it was something else entirely. They called it the human problem. Too aggressive. Too unpredictable. Too dangerous. Admiral Lisa Grant intercepted Jake on the way to the transport platform. Her expression carried the gravity of history. She handed him data pads filled with accusations, a litany of grievances filed in just the past month alone. The Zilani accused humans of destabilizing trade networks that had balanced their society for thousands of years. The Corfax military claimed human ship designs violated the natural order of warfare, their reconfigurable hulls offering unfair advantage. Even the peaceful Taurani charged humans with expanding into sacred territory without permission. Every major power had a complaint. And today, all those voices would echo together. The transport descended through violet clouds into the heart of Nexus Prime, down to the council chambers carved deep within the planet's core. The building itself was older than human civilization, sculpted from a gemstone the size of a mountain, glowing faintly with its own inner light. History weighed on the air like gravity. Inside, 12 great thrones formed a perfect circle, each one designed for a different race. A floating crystal dais for the Zilani, a massive basalt seat for the rock-bodied Gurvani, a living aquatic chamber for the Nereid. At the center sat a chair for humanity. Simple. Crude. Almost insulting in its smallness. The great doors sealed like thunder. The trial began. One by one, the elder species denounced humanity. The Zilani spoke first, their translucent bodies shimmering angry crimson. 300 colonies in a single decade. It violated every ancient precedent, even if not written law. They accused humans of recklessly disturbing primitive species and destabilizing entire economies. The Corfax war chief followed, his 6 arms cutting the air like blades. Human tactics, he said, were chaotic, impossible to predict, dishonorable. Their warships transformed mid-battle, reshaping like predators in motion. That adaptability, he claimed, was more dangerous than raw firepower. Others added their voices. The Gurvani condemned human mining for being too efficient. The Nereid protested the construction of underwater cities. The insectoid Hexarch accused human agriculture of creating food surpluses so vast that it disrupted their fragile balance. For hours Jake listened, his translator struggling to keep pace. He felt as though the galaxy itself was pressing down upon him. And yet, when his turn came, he stood calmly. His defense was simple, direct, unmistakably human. Yes, humanity was expanding. But no treaty forbade it. Yes, human technology was advancing quickly. But they shared it freely with any who wished to learn. Yes, humans were unpredictable. But never once had they launched an unprovoked war. Everything humanity had done was legal. Only tradition, old, stagnant tradition, had been broken. The Zilani speaker's colors shifted to a deep, furious red. Law is not the issue, she replied. Order is. You are chaos embodied. If left unchecked, humanity will unravel the peace we have maintained for 10,000 years. There was no debate. The vote was called. Jake watched as 12 ancient empires cast their judgment into the pulsing heart crystal at the chamber's center. When the last symbol faded, the gem flared white. The decision was unanimous. Humanity was declared incompatible with galactic civilization. Every colony, every settlement, every outpost, abandoned within 30 standard days. Any human found within council space after that deadline would be arrested. Exile. Jake felt the words like a physical blow. 30 days to uproot millions from worlds they had built with blood and sacrifice. 30 days before humanity would vanish from the maps of civilization. Admiral Grant was already barking orders into her comm, organizing the greatest evacuation in human history. Entire cities would be stripped to skeletons. Ships would be converted into lifeboats. Families would leave behind everything but each other. As their transport lifted back toward orbit, Jake looked down one final time at the crystalline city below. The council believed they had solved a problem. They thought banishing humanity would restore stability. What they had never understood was this: humans had never needed permission to survive. The outer rim was waiting. A region of dead worlds, lethal radiation, and uncharted voids, the place where other civilizations had always turned away. But where others saw desolation, humanity would see a frontier. Exile was not the end. It was the beginning. And so, humanity's greatest adventure began not with discovery, not with conquest, but with banishment. Backhand index pointing right. If you're enjoying this story of humanity's exile and survival, consider subscribing. It helps me bring more long-form, thought-provoking sci-fi like this to you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think humanity would thrive in exile, or collapse under the weight of isolation? Let me know in the comments below. The stars in the outer rim did not shine with the same gentle brilliance as those near the core. Here, they burned like cold embers, scattered across a vast dark sea. The galactic maps showed these regions as empty, unworthy of exploration. But for humanity, freshly exiled, this emptiness became a lifeline. In the chaos of evacuation, millions of voices filled the void. Entire fleets carried refugees. Agricultural worlds were stripped bare, their last harvests stored in cargo holds. Families left behind monuments, art, cities, everything that tied them to the past. They brought only what could fit into starships, tools, seeds, children, and memory. The first months were a storm of desperation. Starvation loomed. Disease spread in cramped transports. Some colonies fractured, attempting to scatter and survive alone. Others, despairing, tried to return to council space, only to be arrested or destroyed. Yet slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The scattered fleets gathered around a single world, an unremarkable planet on the edge of a dying star system. To the galaxy, it was nothing. To humanity, it became everything. They called it New Terra. At first glance, the planet was hostile. Its atmosphere thin. Its surface scarred by radiation storms. Oceans shallow, poisoned with heavy metals. The kind of world other civilizations would pass by without a second thought. But humans had no luxury of choice. Where others saw death, they saw possibility. Terraforming began not as a grand project, but as survival itself. Crews in patched suits spread across the wastelands, seeding hardy algae that could breathe thin air and drink poison seas. Modular habitats sprouted across the planet's surface like stubborn weeds, growing into fragile cities. In orbit, engineers turned starships into factories, recycling every scrap of metal into atmosphere processors, wind turbines, and soil generators. Old warships became weather control stations. Cargo freighters were dismantled to create the first orbital ring, a structure meant not for defense, but for life support. And everywhere, humans adapted. They rewired machines to run on broken resources. They crafted medicines from local toxins. They ate what could not be eaten, drank what could not be drunk. Humanity bent the rules of biology, of engineering, of survival itself. No other species could have done this. No other species would have even tried. The outer rim watched in silence. Traders whispered of human tenacity. Explorers told stories of refugees who had turned poison into food and wastelands into homes. Even the council could not fully ignore the reports, though officially, humanity no longer existed. Life on New Terra was brutal. Radiation storms tore through settlements, forcing entire populations underground for weeks at a time. Crops failed more often than they succeeded. The young grew up in domes where the stars were a rumor and the surface a danger. Generations were taught to build, to endure, to improvise. Childhood itself became preparation for survival. But slowly, the planet changed. Algae spread into seas, purifying waters once thought dead. The skies grew thicker, breathable. Crops no longer withered under the thin sun. For the first time, children could step outside domes without fear. New Terra was no longer hostile. It was becoming home. Yet exile had left deep scars. Every child knew the story of the trial at Nexus Prime. Every family carried the weight of displacement. Humanity had not simply lost territory, it had lost recognition. To the galaxy, humans were exiles, outcasts, shadows on the edge of maps. But among themselves, something new formed. Old nations dissolved. Earth itself became myth. The exiles no longer spoke of being American, Chinese, Nigerian, Brazilian. Borders mattered little when survival demanded unity. A new identity formed, not of Earth, not of nations, but of humanity itself. And with this unity came a vision. Admiral Lisa Grant, now a leader revered more than any president or prime minister had once been, gave a speech on the eve of New Terra's first stable harvest. Her words were simple, but they carved themselves into history. We are not broken. We are not gone. They banished us because they feared us. And now, in this wasteland, we will prove them right. Her declaration spread across every colony, every habitat, every starship. For the first time since exile, hope became more than survival. It became destiny. The next century unfolded like a miracle. Terraforming completed. Oceans turned blue. Forests spread across continents once barren. New Terra grew into a thriving cradle of civilization, different from Earth, yet no less sacred. Orbital rings expanded into shipyards. Human fleets returned to the stars, not as desperate refugees, but as explorers once again. But humanity had changed. The hardships of exile forged a culture unlike any before. Their technology was modular, adaptable, designed to be torn down and rebuilt anywhere. Their society valued resilience above comfort, unity above division. They remembered what it meant to have nothing, and so they built everything with purpose. Children raised in domes became adults who saw entire worlds as canvases. Scientists who had once struggled to keep crops alive now reshaped ecosystems across star systems. Soldiers who had defended fragile outposts now commanded fleets capable of surviving deep in the void. Humanity had been cast out. But in exile, they had become something greater. And yet, a quiet question lingered. Would the galaxy leave them in peace? Or would the same fear that had exiled them now return, magnified by what humanity had become? The council thought it had removed a problem. Instead, it had planted a seed. One that had now grown into something vast, unpredictable, and unstoppable. New Terra was only the beginning. Backhand index pointing right. Exile did not end humanity. It reforged it. If you've been following this journey, let me ask you, do you think the council was right to fear humanity? Or did their fear create the very destiny they hoped to prevent? Share your thoughts below, and if you want to continue exploring the long arc of humanity in exile, make sure you're subscribed. A century had passed since exile. For the galaxy, humanity was little more than a rumor. The council no longer spoke of them. Their records were sealed, their name erased from official histories. To most civilizations, the humans were a forgotten species, scattered and broken on the barren edge of the rim. But silence can be deceiving. In the dark, humanity grew. From the seed of new terra, colonies spread outward, each shaped by necessity and resilience. Worlds once barren became gardens. Harsh moons were carved into sanctuaries. Asteroids were hollowed into cities, humming with life. Where others saw obstacles, humanity saw beginnings. They did not expand with fanfare. There were no grand declarations, no demands for recognition. Instead, they expanded like roots, quietly, steadily, beneath the notice of the galaxy. By the time traders and explorers stumbled across their worlds, entire systems had already transformed. At first, the galaxy laughed. Reports of human colonies seemed impossible. How could exiles thrive where established empires had failed? Council officials dismissed the stories as exaggerations, or propaganda spread by smugglers. Humans were weak. Humans were desperate. Humans had been cast out for a reason. But the evidence grew harder to ignore. Caravans returned from the rim with goods unlike any seen before, metals purified from poisoned seas, crops grown in irradiated soil, medicine synthesized from toxins considered untreatable. Human products carried a strange quality, not perfection, but adaptability. They worked anywhere, under any condition. Other species began to purchase them in secret. Human engineering was crude by galactic standards, but it survived. And survival, in the uncertain void of the rim, was priceless. Slowly, the whispers began. Perhaps the council had miscalculated. On New Terra, leaders understood the delicate balance. Humanity could not reveal itself too soon, nor too loudly. Their power was not yet in fleets or armies, but in resilience, in the ability to endure where others could not. So they chose patience. Generations were raised not to seek revenge, but to build. Colonies drilled their children in engineering, survival, and adaptation. Every settlement knew the story of exile, not as tragedy, but as warning: the galaxy fears what it does not control. And humans, now, could never again be controlled. Still, there were those who longed for return. Veterans of the exile dreamed of Earth, though Earth itself was long lost to memory. Some spoke of revenge against the Council, of burning their fleets as punishment for centuries of humiliation. But the majority understood, humanity's true strength was not in destruction, but in inevitability. They would not need to fight for recognition. Recognition would come to them. The galaxy began to notice in subtle ways. Explorers who once laughed at humans now avoided their systems, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. Merchant guilds filed quiet reports: human colonies were multiplying faster than any projections. Council observers noted that trade routes along the rim had shifted, increasingly dominated by human-built stations. Even the Harari, a neutral, ancient species known for their silence, issued a cryptic warning to the Council. Seeds cast into darkness do not die. They grow roots. They grow forests. Beware the shadow that becomes a horizon. The Council dismissed the words. But unease lingered. For the first time in millennia, they had no control over a rising civilization. Humanity was not bound by treaties, not tied to old alliances. They were free, utterly free, to shape their destiny. And that destiny was unfolding faster than anyone could predict. By the 3rd century of exile, humanity had spread across hundreds of systems. Their fleets, once ragged refugee vessels, now traveled with precision, built from modular designs that could be assembled on any world. Their weapons were not the most advanced, but they were brutally efficient, designed to function after damage, after sabotage, after catastrophe. The Council had armies. But humanity had endurance. And endurance, history would prove, is the sharper blade. Still, humans did not reveal their hand. They remained quiet, their expansion disguised as survival. They traded where they could, avoided unnecessary wars, and spoke little of their growing strength. To the galaxy, they remained exiles, but exiles who somehow refused to die. Until the day came when silence broke. It began with a distress call. A minor world on the rim, inhabited by a lesser-known species, faced annihilation. A stellar flare had destabilized its atmosphere. The council ignored the plea, the world was too small, too far, too unimportant. But humanity did not ignore it. Within weeks, human fleets arrived. Terraformers descended. Factories deployed. In less than a year, the world was stabilized, its people saved. The rescued species swore allegiance not to the council, but to humanity. The news spread like fire. The galaxy watched as a forgotten, exiled people had done what the mighty council would not, they had saved a world. From that moment, silence was no longer possible. More worlds called for aid. Some were plagued by famine. Others by war. And everywhere, humanity responded. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as builders, healers, and protectors. This was humanity's true counterattack. Not fleets of war, but fleets of survival. Not the destruction of worlds, but the saving of them. And with every world saved, the council's authority weakened. Because the truth could no longer be denied, exile had not broken humanity. It had made them indispensable. The galaxy had feared what humans might become. Now it saw the reality, and that reality was unstoppable. Yet beneath the hope, a question remained, whispered in the dark corners of New Terra. If humanity had risen this far in silence, what would they do when the galaxy finally recognized them? Backhand index pointing right. Humanity's silent expansion is complete. But the galaxy is watching now, and watching with unease. Do you think humanity will stay patient, or will the council's fear return, stronger than ever? Let me know what you think below, and don't miss the next part, where the galaxy's fragile balance begins to break.